Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Fletcher, back in New York City. Really excited for this week's episode. It's just going to be you and me, but I'm including some of you because I'm actually going to be reading a few letters that I received from listeners. I love the word letters. It's kind of an outdated word. The idea of writing someone a letter is so quaint and old-fashioned. One was a Twitter direct message, and the other was a good old-fashioned email, which I guess is as close to a letter as most of us come to writing each other nowadays. A lot to talk about today on the podcast. But before I get to any of that, I want to let you guys know I will be performing in Las Vegas at a place called The Space. So you can check out thespacelv.com, and you will see that on November 22nd, we will be, Joe Stapleton and a cast of thousands and I will all be performing our stand-up acts in Vegas on November 22nd. That's a Friday night. I would really love it if some of you guys could come out, enjoy the show, and say hello afterwards. Tell me that you heard about it here on the TPE podcast. That would be awesome. So let's get into it. For those who haven't listened to last week's episode, I expressed probably an unpopular opinion when I basically said that I would like to see tournaments be more top heavy. In fact, I'm all the way on the extreme where I like the idea of tournaments being winner take all. And part of that is because I feel like that would change the dynamics of watching people play, because nowadays so many players, and correctly so, by the way, are very concerned with pay jumps and laddering up. I just don't think it's that interesting for the viewers at home to watch you fold a strong hand so that you can win an extra $8,000 for 19th place instead of 20th place or whatever. And I think that one way to eliminate that would be if all tournaments were winner take all. I also mentioned last week that the original World Poker Tour format, regardless of the number of entries, 50% of the prize pool would go to first place. And it was fun to watch poker back then, and I feel like poker has gotten a little bit more boring as players are incentivized to just try to climb the ladder, especially when the payout structure is very flat. So I would play a winner-take-all tournament. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe most of you listening, the thought of getting third place out of 694 players and having to go home with nothing makes you very angry, and maybe even gives you tilt before you even sit down to play. But for me, I would love to do that, and I think that that would be a lot more fun for the viewers at home. So a regular listener and frequent Twitter contributor, I guess you could say, by the name of Tony Newman, sent me a message about this very subject. Hi, Clayton. I was listening to this week's TPE pod when you mentioned how you'd want to play in a winner-take-all tournament, which got me thinking I could envision a small series on Poker Go or other outlet that would have maybe 5 tournaments like this. And in order to make it better for the viewer, I think you'd need a couple of twists. One, the players would all have to declare who has pieces of whom and in what percentages. Yeah, I definitely agree with this first part here, Tony. And by the way, thank you for sending me your message and for all of the engagement that I get. Tony is a very strong poker player himself. He's even been a guest on some of my favorite podcasts, including Thinking Poker with Andrew Brokos. Tony hasn't been a guest on this podcast because he doesn't play tournaments, and we always talk about tournaments. Although obviously from this message he sent me, Tony is a fan of watching tournaments. So obviously we would need to be very clear who is backing whom and all of that. That would be fundamental. Otherwise, it would just be too easy for collusion to happen. And with 7 players left, it's a winner-take-all format. 5 of the players are all, sharing pieces of each other. It would make so much sense for those players to all chip dump to whoever the last one is. Which is why my original concept for this wouldn't have been in a Poker Go type of format, more of an open to the public, every man for himself kind of format. But yeah, if you did this on TV, like that would definitely need to be established right off the bat. And Tony goes on to, this one is my favorite. You'd need to have all the deal making at the end completely in the open, maybe even done live at the table. Think of the drama this could bring, especially if one player thinks he has a skill edge. I think that would be great, to watch people negotiate whether they want to chop, whether anybody wants to actually go for it. I think that would be fun and kind of a let's make a deal or no deal kind of format, where the viewers at home were actually in on the chop if there is one. I mentioned last week that in a single table satellite in Vegas during the World Series of Poker, they are officially winner-take-all tournaments. However, many of them end up being chopped, and I know we've spoken about those satellite tournaments here on the podcast before, particularly as it pertained to a person that I was playing against, and she thought that the two of us would collude against one of our opponents. Spoiler alert, I did not cooperate with her game plan. Anyway, yeah, I'm not a cheater. I'm sorry, guys. Apologize for that. Anyway, I think it would be compelling. I agree with Tony. So if there's anyone listening that wants to help me make this happen, I would love to produce a winner-take-all poker tournament, or possibly even poker tournament series, and we see what kind of turnout we would get. It would definitely be the far extreme compared with the way things are done now, where more and more players are getting paid. Like in the old days, it would be 10%. Nowadays, like the WSOP is up to 15%. Even a lot of online tournaments are at 12 or 15%. And then the payouts are just getting flatter and flatter. So if you're old school like me and you want to see this happen, let me know your thoughts. So Tony Newman, T Newman 4 on Twitter, thank you so much for engaging on this topic and for your thoughts on the subject. Much appreciated. I'd like to continue now with a hand that a listener sent in. This is actually, it's from a listener named Philip from Los Angeles. He played in the $250 Venetian We're Gonna Take All the Money tournament. I don't know if you guys heard about this ridiculous tournament, but there was a $150,000 guaranteed prize pool with something like 6 starting flights, $250 buy-in, and it was controversial because the prize pool was set at $150,000 regardless of how many entries they got. So even if they ended up getting like $1 million worth of buy-ins, they were only going to pay out $150,000. I called this the let's see exactly how stupid people are tournament by the Venetian. Well, it turns out people are smarter than Venetian thought they were, because this tournament was a failure. It was controversial. Players were publicizing how bad of an idea this is and how we didn't want to support this tournament because of the precedent that would be set if we all supported this cockamamie idea. So as a result, this tournament had a massive overlay, and that's why Philip decided to play. He says there was a huge overlay, and so I decided to play. But I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that he opens his correspondence to me by saying, Clayton, I'm a huge fan of the podcast, and I've really gotten a lot out of the way you break down hands and talk through different thought processes. I appreciate this type of email so much, Philip. Actually, for everyone who's written, I know there have been a lot of emails kind of sitting in my inbox for a while. And if you want to send one, it's poker@claytonfletcher.com. The easiest way to reach me is just to tweet at Clayton Comic. I'm on Twitter a lot more often than I am on my email. But yeah, of course, I do check my emails from time to time. And it was really nice to see this one from Philip from California. So he wants to discuss a hand that he played in this ridiculous Venetian event. So it's 100 and 200. You start with 25,000. Philip had gotten off to a great start. He's only in the second level. 100, 200 was level 2. And he's already got over 40K in his stack. He says, my image at the table was loose aggressive for sure, as I've been opening a lot of pots, but I had turned over the goods every time. So I think the other players thought my range was wide, but calculated, far from maniacal. Well, if he's turned over the goods a lot, it's possible he did not have a loose, aggressive image. If I see a player who is involved in a lot of pots, but every time he turns his hand over, he's got a big one, it's hard for me to necessarily put him on a loose opening range. So because the tournament is so early in the tournament, it's possible that your opponents just think you've been picking up a lot of hands. So I don't know if that's necessarily going to affect our strategy in this hand, but I wouldn't assume that they think you're loose unless you've actually shown some garbage mixed in with all the pots you've been playing. So anyway, for the hand in question, it's about an hour into the tournament, blinds 100, 200, and I'm on the button with 41,000. So yeah, he's doing great. He's up from 25K starting, only an hour in. Under the gun limps in with 55,000 behind, and it folds around to the cutoff, who raises to 600. Now, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Philip wrote, who makes a standard open at this table to 600. So before we talk about the hand, I want to talk about kind of the word choice here. So I'm old school, guys. You guys know I love to talk about M, and I talk about I use some terms that have kind of gone by the wayside. But an open is being the first person to voluntarily enter the pot. So to me, this pot was opened by the limper. In fact, we used to call that open limping. So technically speaking, I wouldn't say that the cutoff made a standard open because this pot had already been limped into by the under the gun player. So it is a raise for sure. So he bumps it up to 600, which if that really had been established as the standard opening raise, then in my opinion, the cutoff should have made it a little bit bigger because it's going to be a trivially easy call for at least the under the gun limper and probably for the big blind as well, who's going to be pretty well priced in with a lot of hands. Now, we don't know yet what the cutoff has. We know he only has 12K behind, but remember, guys, when the blinds are only 100 and 200, that's plenty of chips. I mean, his M is 40. He's got 60 big blinds. So it's not like he's on a short stack. It just feels like he is because the other two players in this pot are so deep. Like we have 41 and under the gun has 55. So anyway, the cutoff makes it 600 after the under the gun player limped. Now, a little bit more about this player who raised. The cutoff player was a solid reg, possibly a pro, but he'd been getting beaten up thus far with a lot of second best hands, and he'd even lost a few of those showdowns to me, and I felt I had his respect. Now, for some reason, Philip put the word respect in quotation marks, so I wonder if that's just a little bit of commentary on how often we ever do actually get, respect at the table. So the cutoff is raising. He's obviously running bad if he's down to 12K from 25K after only about an hour of play. And now we're going to put ourselves in Philip's shoes here on the button with two black tens. So let's talk about Philip's decision here. So we saw an under the gun limp, and the cutoff player, who may or may not be tilting, but has certainly not been running good, raises to 600. Now, with these stacks, I'm not sure if I want to 3-bet here with two tens. If we, obviously we're not going to fold, so the choice is between flatting on the button and 3-betting. I think it's fine if you want to go ahead and put in a 3-bet, but I think that my preference, especially in position, and especially in light of the fact that the under the gun player limped in, I don't want to lose more money than I have to with these tens. A lot of strategists feel like we should be trying to accumulate chips at minimal risk. Especially now we've built a stack from 25K to 41K. Do we want to now start putting that stack at risk, or any large chunk of it at risk with pocket tens? I don't know. I mean, you got to have some 3-betting hands in your range that aren't pocket aces, and pocket tens is a very good hand. But I think that all things considered, I would prefer to just call here. And there are a few reasons for this. Number one, I'm concerned about the under the gun limper. Now we have to think about who are the players who actually signed up to participate in this tournament. Maybe it's not the strongest field in the world. Maybe it's just players that would play any poker tournament. Maybe not particularly conscious about whether they're supporting something that's bad for the game as a whole. Maybe not even thinking in those terms. And this really isn't a knock on Phil. I mean, it's a free country. If you decide you want to play in a tournament like this because of the overlay, I really can't fault a player who's trying to make money playing cards. And if at that point it was clear that they were never going to reach the guarantee, then there's probably nothing wrong with playing it. I'm just thinking generally, are your opponents in this tournament very savvy? The under the gun limp concerns me. Like, what's going to happen if I put in, say, 2,500 here, and now the under the gun limper makes it 8,000? I don't really want to put in 20% of my stack against almost surely aces or kings when I only have pocket tens. It just doesn't feel like a good play. So I would likely have to 3-bet and then fold, which I hate to do with pocket tens when I could have just seen the flop and possibly even busted an overpair if I hit a set. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating just playing these tens for set mining value only. I'm just saying a lot can go wrong if we raise here. So for me, I would have chosen usually to call in this spot and have my 3-bet range be hands like, obviously, monsters like jacks plus, ace king, probably a lot of ace queen, maybe even some ace jack suited in that mix, as well as ace 5 suited, and maybe a few suited connectors, maybe like 2 combinations of 8-7 suited as well. And I feel like that gives you a good balanced 3-betting range without being too exploitable, but also having pocket aces or at least an ace blocker when you do it will dramatically decrease the likelihood that this under the gun limper has big tickets. So that's kind of why I would rather call. I don't think that raising here is terrible, but I just think it does set you up for some difficult decisions, particularly against the under the gun limper. So Philip acknowledges that as well, writing, I looked down at two black tens and made it 2,200 to go, trying to isolate the short stack or at least find out if Under the Gun was limping with a monster. The cutoff had 4-bet all in 3 times in the last 10 or so hands without being called, and he only had 12,000 in front of him. So I felt putting pressure on him with the intent of calling if he shoved was the best move. Okay, well, I wish that I had read that paragraph aloud before I started talking about my thought process in calling. First of all, I don't think this guy's a short stack at all. As mentioned, he's got 60 big blinds and an M of 40 with no ante, 100 and 200. He is fine. But for whatever reason, he has been 4-betting all in a lot, possibly tilting from having lost half of his stack in the first hour, maybe incorrectly considering his stack short when it's obviously not. So with all that said, I like the 3-bet a little bit better if that's the goal. And if he's really going to 4-bet all in with much worse than tens, then yeah, I guess we can just go ahead and get it in with him. It seems like a lot of all ins for the first hour. He's already been all in 3 times in the last 10 hands. So possibly he's just tilting and trying to get back to at least a starting stack, or maybe he's one of these guys that likes to view the re-entry period as a free-for-all, and he's just trying to get it all in with any 2 cards. So if that's the case, certainly this 3-bet is a lot more justifiable. Philip continues, anyway, the player Under the Gun, who I really didn't have a read on yet, it should be noted this player doubled up on the first hand after sitting down when he called a 4-bet pre-flop with jacks against aces and spiked a jack. Okay, so at that point, basically he's limping in now. I would love to know whether he raised with his jacks and whether he had them under the gun, like a little more information, because, just knowing how he got his stack is helpful, but it would be more helpful if it could help us give a little more context in terms of what this limp means in this hand. So without that, I'll just go ahead and assume that we can take Philip at his word. He doesn't really have a read on this player yet. I didn't have too much to go on aside from the fact that he looked comfortable being there and had been limp calling often. Okay, so there it is. The limp calling often piece tells us that maybe he's been limping a lot, and so he doesn't necessarily have a monster here. But he certainly could, and he is under the gun. So anyway, the action goes call from the under the gun limper, and then the quote-unquote short stack, who is already 4-bet all in 3 times, folds. So it's just 2 of us to the flop, and we are in position holding pocket tens against a player who limped under the gun and now called our 3-bet after the cutoff had raised him to 600. So we put in 22. Now this guy who opened limped now calls, and the raiser folds. So we're in position with 2 black tens, and the flop comes ace of diamonds, jack of hearts, 5 of spades, and our opponent checks. Okay, so let's break it down. There's, what is it, about 5,000 in the pot-ish? We are not betting here, right? I mean, we have pocket tens. We did 3-bet pre-flop, representing a big hand. We could turn our hand into a bluff and go ahead and put in a little continuation bet here. But the problem for me is, what do we think under the gun has that he actually called? Like, usually limping and then calling a really big 3-bet is something like a middle pair, right? So we probably have him beat anyway. Also, if he has a jack or an ace, would he call? Is he ever going to fold if we bet? I don't think so. Well, we might be able to push him off a jack if he's loose enough to have done this with something like Queen Jack suited or King Jack suited, and he just has a Jack here, yeah, okay, maybe we can get him off of that particular hand category if his hand doesn't improve and if we barrel 2 or 3 times. I just don't think that the early stages of the tournament, when we don't really have a read on our opponent, is the time for such complicated plays. You know what? We 3-bet, probably expecting to take it down a lot with pocket tens, but knowing that if we got called by either or both of our opponents, we would have pocket tens to play in position. And the idea is that we would be able to play this hand well. So we inflated the pot, hoping to hit a 10 or at least a good flop. This is a terrible flop for our hand, and I think we just want to cut our losses. I would check with the intention of folding to a turn bet. So let's see what Philip says. Because of how active I had been, I decided to check behind with the intent of playing a small pot. Show people that I don't always see bet, but that I do have hands worth 3-betting. Yeah, okay, so I feel like, Philip, you might be overestimating the importance of showing these tens at some point. Yeah, obviously players want to know what you 3-bet with, and it's good to have strong hands sometimes when you 3-bet, but I wouldn't worry about that, especially in this tournament, especially at this stage of this tournament. Even though I believe I had a perceived range advantage, I thought this player was as likely to check an ace to me as he would be to check a hand worse than mine, and this early with my stack, I didn't feel the need to start building a big pot with third pair. Now you sound like me pre-flop. Like, I don't feel the need to 3-bet this hand for the same reason. It's early, we're in great shape, we have a good stack, and I'm really not a huge fan of the pre-flop 3-bet with these stacks. But yes, I do support the flop check here, Philip. I think that's the right play, and I think that most of our listeners will agree with that as well. At least that was the plan, Philip goes on, until the 10 of hearts peeled off on the turn, giving me a set, but also bringing the straight, as well as the backdoor flush draw. Okay, so the 10 of hearts comes off, and now our board is ace, jack, 5, 10 with 2 hearts. Yeah, so let's first talk about whether we like this card. I think this is a very good card for us. I mean, obviously, it's always nice to make a set. More importantly, it's unlikely that our opponent has a king-queen in his range. It's certainly possible, but it seems like limping and then calling with king-queen would be pretty bad, given that there have been 2 raises. I would definitely put, especially without having a strong read that this guy's a total fish, I would put most players on a stronger range. Maybe like middle pairs up to maybe jacks, or even some players might do this with pocket queens. Other than that, 2 raises in front of him should probably gotten him to fold most of his unpaired hands, and certainly if I limp in with pocket aces or pocket kings and then there's all this juicy action behind me, I want to get all in if possible, so I'm going to keep raising. There are some players that would slow play, though. That's pretty uncommon though, so I wouldn't be worried about aces or kings. Obviously we're beating kings now because we just turned a set, but I just mean in general. And I don't think there should be too many ace king, ace queen type of hands in our opponent's range at all. The reason for this is simple. It's uncommon for players to limp in with ace king or ace queen in the first place. But if they do, they're probably going to 4-bet it after all this action because you're out of position with ace king. Now, if this play, and we don't really have a good read on our opponent other than he's been loose and passive, kind of limp calling a lot. So maybe I just contradicted myself, and perhaps he has more ace king, ace queen than I thought he had. But I certainly don't think I would put too many king, queen, queen, jack type hands in his range. But here's the difficulty of this exercise. We're playing a $250 tournament. We're in the early levels against an opponent that we don't have a read on, and we don't know what his range is because we don't have a read on him other than kind of a nebulous, he limps and calls a lot, and he doubled up when he had jackses and cracked aces with them. So without more information, I just have to assume this guy is going to be a typical $200 to $300 tournament player, and therefore I wouldn't put very many unpaired hands in his range. So let's continue here on the turn where, Hero just made a set with the 10 of hearts. My opponent somewhat deliberately bets 2,000 into a pot of 5,300. His bet and overall demeanor seemed consistent with what I was putting him on the flop, a big ace. Okay, so this is weird, Philip. Like, you and I really disagree about how many big aces are in our opponent's range. I mean, I've played a lot of small stakes to medium stakes tournaments in my life, and many of them have been at the Venetian, although I did not participate in the let's see how stupid people are tournament. I've been there a lot, and I haven't had the same experience as you, evidently, because I don't see a lot of limp calling with big aces, especially under the gun. I think most players, they just raise with those hands. Ace king in particular, everybody raises with ace king. Maybe not everybody, like the old guy wants to make a pair first because, quote, that's just a drawing hand. But by now, the rest of us know that you should be raising with your big aces. So because he just limped in from under the gun and then just called the 3-bet, I don't really think I have too many ace X type hands in his range. So I guess you and I differ on that very important point. His bet and overall demeanor seemed consistent with a big ace, checking an ace into me on the flop and now betting for fear of me checking it down. Yeah, well, if somehow he does get to the turn with just a pair of aces, he does need to bet it to protect his hand from all the possible draws and to hopefully get value from you. However, again, I don't really think that he has an ace very much at all. I thought for a while, since the 10 also brought the straight, along with adding a potential backdoor heart draw, but I just didn't think that player would limp flat a 3-bet from out of position with king queen, maybe king queen of hearts. Okay, so you think he doesn't limp and then call with king queen, but he does exactly that with ace 10, ace jack, ace queen, and ace king. So I guess this is the part of his range where we differ. Like, I just don't think he open limps with ace king or ace queen very much, and I definitely don't think that he calls 2 raises with it. And so obviously, yeah, I would say king queen should not be in his range at all. I mean, definitely players will surprise you sometimes. Maybe they just have a favorite hand or because it was suited. And, he is pretty rich right now. Even 2,200 that you made it is not that big a percentage of his big stack, and things have been going his way. So it's not completely out of the question that he could show up with king, queen of hearts or something similar here that made the nuts. But I still discount it just because I don't really see players playing those hands in this way. I decided to raise to 6,000, trying to play into my self-perceived lag reputation and get value from ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, while also trying to unearth any ace, ace, or jack, jack now. Okay, yeah, like I don't think anybody can put this guy on pocket aces, right? I just don't think that's a part of his range that we have to worry about. I definitely think jacks are the hand that I fear the most. And then the optimistic side of me hopes that he has pocket fives. So I'm not saying he never has king queen, and I'm not saying he can't have ace 10, ace jack, ace queen, or ace king. I just think that I discount those hands a little bit more than you do. And with that in mind, I would be afraid to raise him here. I think his bet is strange. So if he doesn't have king queen, I think because I don't think he has a lot of ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, ace x hands, his bet is alarming because it's either a set, which is probably never pocket aces, so it's either a set of jacks or a set of fives, and I think that both are plausible here, or he's just bluffing with something like pocket eights, which I think is a really big part of his limp and then call to raises range. So with that in mind, I don't really like this raise here, even though our hand is fairly close to the nuts. I'm not worried about him having a heart draw because, again, I don't think he has very many unpaired hands at all. And I just don't think I can get much value from a raise. In this spot, I would be hoping that my opponent has a set of fives. But we'll be able to get plenty more chips from him later if that's the case. He thought for a good 30 to 45 seconds and just called, which made me feel very confident my hand was best for now, with a small chance he flats with king queen. But again, I don't think that hand is really in his range. Okay, yeah, we're not particularly worried about king queen. So to me, because I'm discounting the ace x type hands, even the big ones, again, not that they're impossible, but I don't think they're a big part of his range. I think I'm either way ahead of pocket fives or way behind pocket jacks. So we have third set, and we think our opponent usually has either second set or bottom set. So I agree that we're not too worried about king queen. So when he just flats, I think we can discount pocket jacks a little bit more, although he has to worry that we have king queen. So some players, because people don't like to take big chances early in tournaments, he could even just call with a hand like pocket jacks. The river paired the 5 but didn't bring the flush for a final board of ace jack 5 10 5 with no flushes available. Now at first glance this might appear I'm not reading anymore, this is Clayton now. At first glance this 5 might appear to be a good card, but remember guys, I'm looking at this hand like I don't think our opponent has just a top pair very much. Maybe he could have like ace jack, but it just, again, I don't feel like he has a lot of limp calls with ace x at all. So I thought we could be ahead of one of our opponent's two most likely holdings, pocket jacks and pocket fives. And now that the 5 paired, there are no hands that I think we can beat anymore unless our opponent has something weird. So this is a spot where, without a read on my opponent, I'm not that excited about my full house. If I could be sure that he's a fish that would pay me off with something like ace queen, then I would be hoping that he could check and that I could bet and try to get value from that, a hand like that. Instead, what happens is, and I'm quoting again, my opponent somewhat surprised me when he led the river for 11,000 into a pot of 17,300. Okay, so at this point, Philip has a decision. To me, the decision is between making the crying call and folding. I don't think that Philip should be thinking about raising, because even though we have a strong hand, the way this hand has played out, we can only beat a bluff right now. As crazy as that sounds, we have a full house, but I can't think of any hand that would bet 11,000 that we can beat. I mean, he's just not doing this with ace king or ace jack. He's just not. After we raised on the turn and he called, for him to bet again, in my experience playing against the field in a $200, $300, or $400 tournament, when I was the last aggressor on the previous street and now he donk leads into me on this street, that's almost always a monster. So I'm still worried about quad fives and a better full house, namely pocket jacks. So with all that said, I would be probably inclined to fold this. As nitty and as tight as some of you will think I am, like, how do you fold a full house in the first hour of a tournament against an unknown opponent? I mean, I think I've broken it down because I just don't think he's making this bet with ace X, even ace jack. That means that I can't beat anything. And in order to call, I really have to be able to put him on a bluff. And how does he bluff when he got raised on the turn? Like, if he was bluffing on the turn and got raised, like, how is he still in the hand? Like, players who have their bluffs raised are usually gone. So for him to call the raise on the turn kind of tells me he's not bluffing. He's got a value hand. And because I can't think of a value hand that bets 11K here on the river, I can't call the bet. I'm going to fold. And on the rare occasion that he's got me beat, he's going to win. I think most players would be afraid to make this bet with king queen if he somehow got to the river with king queen, which meant that when I raised him on the turn and he had the nuts, he just flatted that. And now he doesn't have anywhere near the nuts because the board paired and he has to put me on a set when I raise the turn, right? And now he bets again. It just doesn't add up. I don't think players are doing this with king queen a lot. As I said before, they'll surprise you sometimes. People show up with hands that you don't think they can have, and then, wow, I can't believe he had that. But in this spot, I just feel like it's quad fives or jacks full a lot. So, yeah, I would fold. So let's read on and see what Philip did. Did he really play aces or jacks, ace or jack this way? Well, no, I don't think that he would ever play aces this way. I shouldn't say ever. Of course, anything's possible. But I don't think that aces are a big part of his range. But I certainly can imagine a lot of players playing pocket jacks this way. I don't know why they limp in with jacks, but it's a thing that you'll see. And then because there's too much heat, he's worried that you have aces, kings, or queens pre-flop, so he doesn't put in a 4-bet, even though his hand is strong enough to at least consider it. So yeah, it feels like jacks a lot. I agree with you that he doesn't have aces, but I think he can also have pocket fives, especially this deep. Set mining is a big part of a correct no limit hold'em strategy, especially when your opponent also has a really deep stack. Philip goes on, if so, have I played my hand strong enough for him to believe I can pay him off for such a big bet? Yeah, I think you have played your hand in a very strong way. I think that you are basically representing king, queen yourself. And so he's hoping that you have a straight, and that's why he didn't raise you on the turn when he has a set. And that's why he has to bet now, because he's afraid that you won't bet your straight on the river if he checks. He's wrong about that, by the way. I think if we do have king, queen here, we're always betting it when check two on the end. But, he'd rather just put the money in himself. And this way he can set the price. He puts 11K in to a pot of 17,300. Does he expect me to raise a bet of that size if he indeed is sitting on the nuts and is trying to get maximum value. Well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure that he's expecting you to raise, but I think that there's no point in you raising. I don't know what hand we can extract value from with a raise that is consistent with the way our opponent played this hand. Okay, so I don't like raising here, because if he's bluffing, he can't call the raise, and you win the 11,000 anyway. And if he's got one of the two hands that I'm worried about, 4 fives or jacks full, then he can't fold to your raise. My hand was obviously way too strong to even consider folding. Do you agree? Well, obviously I disagree respectfully, and I think that I would have folded. But I was really having a hard time because I couldn't put him on a bluff as hard as I tried. Okay, let's get into this, Philip. This is the key to this whole hand and the reason why I wanted to do this hand on the podcast. If you can't put your opponent on a bluff, no matter how hard you tried, then you have to try to put him on a value bet that makes sense and that you can beat. I thought it was more likely, given the way he played his hand, that he had ace king or ace jack or ace 10 for a value bet, or had turned ace queen into a confused blocking bet that didn't know what to do and didn't want to have to call a bet. A lone 5 in his hand wasn't even a consideration. All right, here's what I like about what you're doing here, Philip. You are trying to range your opponent, and you're kind of eliminating some hands from consideration, trying to weight towards the hands that you think are most likely, and all of that. I just disagree with your assessment of how often your opponent is going to have ace king, ace jack, ace 10, ace queen. As I mentioned, I don't see a lot of players limping in under the gun with those hands and then just calling a 3-bet from out of position. I'm not saying they never do it, but I don't think it's a big part of his range. And it certainly doesn't make sense for him to bet 11,000. Even if he has ace jack for top 2, his hand is so far away from the nuts, and he has to be worried about you having king queen, which is what it feels like when you raise the turn. So I don't think that those hands are going to turn around and then donk lead 11K into 17 here on the river into the opponent who put in the last raise on the previous street. I'm not buying that, and therefore I don't think that he has those hands very much. A lone 5 in his hand wasn't even a consideration. Okay, great. Yeah, for me too. I don't think he's limping in and then calling 2 raises with 5-4, 6-5, or anything like that. But I do think that quads is a very real possibility here. At this point, now going back to quoting Phil, at this point, I had about 30,000 behind with a pot of 28,000 and a hand that could raise for value with a lot of hands that my opponent could call with that I could beat. Okay, we're not going to rehash, but I disagree that he has a lot of hands that can call. In the early stages of a multi-day tournament, I know it's important to get max value, so I really took my time in just deciding whether to call out of fear of him having one of 3 precise hands, aces, jacks, or 5s. And again, I think we can really boil it down to 2 precise hands, or raising and trying to get maximum value and collect chips against so many hands in his range that I felt he could call that I could beat. Okay, so I don't know. What are all those hands that he can call? Ace 10? I think ace 10 can find a fold. I don't think he has it, but when he does, I think he can find the fold. King, queen? Okay. King, queen might just, I made the straight. I had the nuts on the turn. You see a lot of players in $200, $300, $400 tournaments calling because they're angry that they had the nuts on the previous street. So I guess you can get value from king, queen, maybe. But again, that hand needs to bet and then just call on the turn when he had the nuts. Certainly possible, but I don't think it's very likely. I opted to raise all in, and my opponent called with jacks. Did I overplay my hand on the river? Yeah, Phil, I hate to tell you, but the way I break this hand down, I do think you overplayed your hand on the river. I think you should have considered folding. If you would have told me, I couldn't fold a hand this strong this early in a tournament against an opponent where I didn't really have a read, I would say it's forgivable. I think in the future you'll be able to find the fold, but it's forgivable. So if you told me you just called, I guess it's fine. I think this is a fold, and I think that most pros will find the fold just because we don't put too much weight on the chance that our opponent has a hand that can call the raise on the turn and then lead right out on the river. There just aren't that many hands that do that. And the hands that do that, generally speaking, are nutty hands like pocket jacks, pocket fives, and of course the occasional bluff. But I don't know. I don't know how many players can find a bluff. I don't even see how a bluff is even possible when he bet called the turn. What is he doing that with that's now bluffing on the end? Yeah. All right. Well, I don't want to beat you up over it, Philip. I don't want you to never email me again. But yeah, I think you should have folded here. I think the best play is to fold. Calling is forgivable, but still a small mistake. And I don't think that shoving makes a lot of sense. He asks, did I get greedy? Is this a scenario that I'm just supposed to go broke? No, I don't think so. I don't think it is. I think when you have aces here and your opponent has pocket fives, that's the scenario that you're supposed to go broke. But with this many chips compared to the tiny blinds and no antes, I think we should just be playing a much smaller pot in this situation, because even though we had a full house, under the circumstances, our hand was just not that strong. And that's going to do it for this week's episode. I really appreciate you writing in, Phil. Hope to meet you sometime in person. Thanks again to Tony Newman for your thoughtful comments on my, hey, let's make tournaments winner take all idea. And for those of you who have not yet joined Tournament Poker Edge, what are you waiting for? For as little as $25 a month, you can have access to all of our top-notch, world-class poker players and professional coaches. All that and more on tournamentpokeredge.com. So for everyone here at TPE, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Guys, thank you so much for listening.
Like they do in Texas, please. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Luck and intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read my poker face. She's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read my poker face. She's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambling is fun when you're with me. I love it. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. And baby, when it's love, it's not rough, it isn't fun. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read my poker face. She's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read my poker face. She's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. Can't read mine, no she can't read my poker face. She's got to love nobody.